Hello and welcome to the Arise interview, where we take time to reflect on the big stories from the news and on the fortunes and affairs of the world in an hour of conversation with commentators, analysts, and thought leaders. I'm Somna Sambu. Coming up in the next 60 minutes, as concerns continue to grow about the dismal performance of public leadership within Nigeria and across the continent, there are yearnings for a new crop of political leaders. One civil society organization, Fixed Politics Initiative, which has a faculty of prominent leaders and successful academics, is set to change the narrative of governance ranking in the country and on the continent. How can the Fixed Politics Initiative boost the governance capabilities and effectiveness of developing countries like Nigeria? We'll speak with the chairperson of the initiative, former Minister of Education, Oby Ezekwesili. And later, there is a rich history of Africa that remains untapped and lost in time, but there's widespread ignorance of this heritage by Africans. My guest today believes that African history has been misrepresented, whitewashed, and defaced due to Eurocentrism. He holds the firm belief that blacks were responsible for something great other than American slavery. Today, we'll speak to the author of I, Black Pharaoh, Emmanuel Kulu, about how America has managed to confront its terrible legacy of slavery and racial violence, and also about his research works on Africa's true imagery, especially in Egyptology. My guest today has been probing the poor quality of politics in Nigeria and across Africa. She has interrogated the nexus between politics and economic development while also being a participant observer. Having seen the systemic failure within the polity, she has now teamed up with other policy and governance experts to raise a new generation of political leaders. To this end, the Fixed Politics Initiative is a strategic response to the research outcome of Dr. Oby Ezekwesili's fellowship research at the Robert Bosch Academy in Berlin, Germany. It seeks to equip future leaders and politicians with the understanding of governance models, citizenship service, and patriotic zeal to serve constituents and the nation. With such a training, officials say they hope to see Nigeria's ranking on governance, accountability, and transparency indexes improve significantly in a few years. Let's take a listen. All right, well, I'm told we do not have it. For more on this, I'm now being joined by the chairperson, workstudy group, Fixed Politics Initiative, Oby Ezekwesili. She's also a Richard von Whisker Fellow at Robert Bosch Academy and former Vice President of the World Bank's Africa Division. She has also served as Nigerian Minister of Education, and she has been a regular figure in Nigeria's polity. Good to have you, Oby Ezekwesili.
Pleasure to be on your program.
All right, good to have you, madam. And it's really nice having you on the show, doctor. How have you been coping since all these initiatives that you've put in place? I mean, there was this red card movement that you had started. It looks like you didn't get the required followership. And now you're here with this new initiative, which a lot of governance experts say it's very needful if we must move ahead, not just as a country, but as a continent.
Well, I think we should all be restless about the state of affairs of our country in particular, but even more broadly, our continent. The truth is that the 21st century is available for us to claim if all of us would be restless until we can get ourselves on the path of good governance and the progress that follows it.
And one of the major issues that a lot of Nigerians are looking out for is how this latest initiative, the SPPG, can help to create the desired change, considering that we have about 211 million citizens, like the government has said of recent. And you are starting with about 3,000 before you migrate to 5,000. Even if you get 10,000, for example, how much difference would that number of trainees actually make within the polity?
Okay, so the first thing to set aside is the idea that the matter of building leadership in any society takes a decade. It takes forever. What we're doing with the School of Politics, Policy and Governance is what many countries did way back A country like, Singapore did it very early in the day when Lee Kuan Yew understood that he needed to build a very strong cadre of political leaders that are also technically competent, so that at every level of governance, they would govern with ethics, with competence, and with capacity. And so because he did that very early, you saw his own track record. By the time that you're looking at, the similarity between us and Singapore, there are so many, both colonized by then Great Britain, have the same kind of historical trajectory, where both underdeveloped countries have similar issues of multi-ethnicity. People always think that Singapore is one tiny country without ethnic issues. There were serious ethnic issues. All of those things that you see that characterize us existed in that Singapore. But because Lee Kuan Yew understood the importance of the quality of leadership, he did something about it, and therefore you see that Singapore has done better than us. Singapore is at more than $65,000 thereabout of GDP per capita. We are at less than 3,000 per capita. So leadership system has to be something that our continent pays attention to. I always say to people that it is frightening how Africans pay more attention to who they hire to run their grocery shop than they pay to who they recruit to be their president or their governor or their local government councillor.
A lot of people would want to ask, is there a failure of leadership or leadership of failure in Nigeria?
That's a play on words, but I think that there is this very classic case of failure of leadership. And the idea behind the concept of failure of leadership is that leadership is the coordinator of everything in any society or in an organization or even in a family. That power to coordinate gives such level of influence to determine what the outcomes can be. And so if a society is lacking leadership, then what would happen is that it might have all the important parts that go into creating a good outcome, but it ends up not able to do so, simply because that influential, that capacity to mobilize, that capacity to understand what comes after what is lacking. And so failure of leadership is something that in every conversation you have across the continent, you find people saying that it is not for lack of enough engineers on our continent that Africa cannot make progress with the development of infrastructure. It is not for lack of medical practitioners on our continent or health practitioners on our continent that our health system is in poor state. It is not for lack of academics on our continent that we have an education system that is not world class. And so the end of that conversation is always, we have a problem of leadership. And for so many decades, we'll just keep saying it. And in some way, I think we have been thinking that it would fix itself. But no, it cannot fix itself. We have to be deliberate in seeking to address it. And so when my fellowship research threw up the fact that our democracy in Africa is on faulty ground because it is a monopolistic type democracy. A monopolistic type democracy in the sense that if you looked at the interaction between the demand side being the electorate and the supply side being the political class, the politicians, that is those who offer themselves to lead and then eventually get the legitimacy to do so. And you look at the regulator that is what should be independent regulators of, say, NEC or the judiciary and such other establishments, if you looked at that relationship as a triangular relationship, you would find that there is a big problem. The big problem is that the supply side, being the political class and the politicians, completely overwhelm that relationship, that space. They dominate that space and push both the regulatory as well as the demand side to the margins. If you're going to understand this well, you would see that in that kind of a relationship, the dominant culture that has persisted is one that, regardless of what political party is in office, the supply side dominates our political space to the utter neglect of the demand side, that is the electorate. That is a distortion, because no democracy should be a monopolistic democracy where one side basically monopolizes the political space. So in correcting it, my research says that we must do something to emerge a new, an empowered and engaged electorate, an electorate that is influential enough to determine political outcomes that are favorable to them. In other words, voters need to vote in the way that would do good for their own cause. And that you have to do something about your political class. This current political class that we've had over the decades on our continent since our independence, where mostly you see a dominant culture that subordinates the common good, the public good, to the personal and narrow interests of the political class, is a political class that you must change. You must do something about it. You must make sure that you are training in a deliberate way people who have very strong values, who have competence in fields of politics, the theory and the practice of it, who understand policies, whether they be economic policies, agriculture policies, technology, health, education, human capital, physical infrastructure, and people who understand governance, so that none of these things that matter in the development process is rocket science to them. Today, in our country and on our continent, it is the case that you look at the quality of public leadership, especially our political class, and you know that we're not playing with our first 11. And we must begin to play with our first 11 at local governance, state governance, federal governance, that is national, and legislative, in the executive, and ultimately the judiciary. To do that requires a deliberateness. There has to be an intentionality about it. You don't just sort of wait for it to take care of itself. Other countries have a leadership recruitment system that makes sure that when you appear in public office, you actually are operating at a certain basic minimum, which today we don't have in our own case.
Very, very interesting indeed, Dr. Oby Ezekwesili. It looks like you have a very rich faculty with the academics that I've seen and all of that, but I've also not seen some regular political actors, because, I mean, if you're going into a school of policy, politics and governance, then you need to tap from the experience of those who have served in public service and distinguish themselves. So wouldn't you be accused of just training people who be academic politicians and not really field operators like we have seen? Because there's this distrust between the masses and technocrats like you, who they keep accusing that you do not know enough of politics. You play academic politics. How come we do not have these regular politicians on your team?
We actually do. We have regular politicians, but we don't have the kind of politicians that you're talking about. You know, because we have regular politicians who have been in politics, but who have done politics from the perspective that there are certain critical skill set and there has to be a mission behind their politics. We don't have transactional politicians, but we have politicians that are thinking of the future, who are interested in building a society where the common good is served. So don't worry about that. We do have politicians on our team. Yes, we do.
Very interesting indeed. I would want to take you back to what the late Professor Chinua Achebe had said, and a slide will actually be played on that right now. He had actually said in his treatise in 1983 that the trouble with Nigeria is simply and squarely a failure of leadership. There is nothing basically wrong with the Nigerian character. There is nothing wrong with the Nigerian land or climate or water, or air, or anything else. How true are these words several decades after Chinua Achebe actually made this in 1983?
I think he was prophetic. He was both speaking of the reality that he had lived, but then I think that he didn't realize how even worse it was going to get. And so it is either we looked at people like Chinua Achebe and we sort of say, thank God for their lives, and then say, even in their absence, we've got to do something about problems well diagnosed by them. Or we simply look at them as people who don't care, he said it because he's not patriotic. Today's scoundrels of patriotism are redefining patriotism for us. But we must not allow that happen. It is important for us to understand that everybody should be in a state of dissatisfaction with what we have as a country and continent. There's absolutely no reason why we should be the laggards of the world. I think that, what drives a person like me is this sense of creative dissatisfaction. I am totally dissatisfied with the fact that it takes much more for someone who, could be growing up as a child, as I did. I was born in '63. By the time of the Civil War, we had to return to my home state, my village. We came back to Lagos in 1970, and I then started my education. But look at me today. The kind of opportunity that I got, a similar child of my economic class at that time would be harder to find the same kind of opportunity. And that's because increasingly we have just eroded public leadership to the point where public leadership does not even think it owes citizens any result. If citizens make the mistake of saying that they demand result of public leadership, they are going to be attacked for thinking that they deserve anything from public leadership. There's no sense that you have to account for exercising public leadership, and that must end. So this creative dissatisfaction drives me, and I am so glad that it drives a number of other citizens, because the members of Fixed Politics are about 125 Nigerians at this time who have done well in their endeavors, in their professional, occupational endeavors. But the state of the country and the continent worries them. And so they participated in my research. And now they participated beyond the research to ideation of that research finding, of the research findings, and now in the execution of those ideas. So all hope is not lost. We don't pretend by any means that this is the rocket science solution or the silver bullet to the problem of leadership failure, but it is a start. By the time you come through the School of Politics, Policy and Governance, as one who has plans to run for public office in this country and later on in other countries of the continent. By the time we have trained you and given you the knowledge of the kinds of mindset orientation and values that you need in order to serve the public, by the time we have given you the competencies in policy, the spectrum of policies that are relevant to your own country. So in the case of Nigeria, our courses are drawn from the key barriers to our economic growth and development. All of those courses, you will go through them. By the time you have taken the courses that address the issues of governance, accountability, transparency, and anti-corruption systems, you would be so loaded that you would be a different kind of politician. No longer should we have politicians that you look at and you can't even relate to what it is they represent or what they don't even represent, as the case may be. So the School of Politics, Policy and Governance is a well...
Yes, but I just want you to address these issues. A lot of Nigerians see you as a leftist, as someone who is a technocrat without a political base, and here you are trying to train Nigerians on politics. Well, you are very good at policy and governance, but when it comes to politics, they think you haven't made so much good about it. How do you juxtapose that with the eagerness of our youthful population? A lot of young politicians to want to create change, but they are not willing to learn. How will you merge both of them together?
Well, they come together in a very good kind of way, because a lot of the, the target for us in the School of Politics, Policy and Governance are two segments of society that have been marginalized in the political process that is monopolistic. And these two, the youth and the women. So they constitute the core of the people that will be admitted into the School of Politics, Policy and Governance. Now, on the matter of me being a leftist, my goodness, this is the first time I ever heard that one. Because, I basically am one who is not driven by any sense of an obsession with this idea that you must have been a politician in order to say, to analytically understand what is wrong with the politics of your country. And that's what happened in a way, because when I ran for office and then I came in direct contact with our politics, I then said, okay, I need to understand this better. I need to spend some time and do some research into the kind of politics that we practice in comparison with politics across the rest of the continent and the larger world, in order to understand what the issues are. And in that study, it comes out clear that our politics is distorted. What we call our politics is not really something to be proud of at all. And so if you said to me that people would say, what do you know that you would teach, politicians? And I would say to them that I'm not the only faculty. I'm, in fact, just one out of about 50-something people that are members of the faculty of the School of Politics and Policy and Governance. Yeah. And I'm going to focus on policy more than I am teaching on politics.
Very quickly, Doctor. Let's talk about this incumbent government. At the beginning of the APC in 2013, 2014, they had called for your ideas on how to run the country if they eventually win in 2015, which they did. How much of your ideas, which you shared with them, do you think has been put into place by this administration, or was it totally jettisoned? Do you feel bad in any way that after consultation you were not taken into government?
Oh no, you shouldn't. That's not even a question to ask. Why? I mean, I have signed off in terms of being any minister of anything in this country since I left government in 2007. I've turned down offers to come back into cabinets since 2007. So there's nothing personal. There's no interest in being anybody's minister in this country. I think that the real question that I see, or rather the key thing that I'd like to use your question to address, is the fact that if anybody should go and listen to the speech that I gave as a development person at that event, what you would say to yourself is, oh wow, what a missed opportunity to listen. They didn't listen. They were not listening. Because, you know, that speech basically took it was analytical. It looked at the journey of Nigeria and the problem of Nigeria as, in fact, at that time, I did say that our problem is not a political party problem, that we have a political class problem. Can you then imagine that I did this speech in 2013 or thereabout? Or was it 2013 or 20? I don't remember now. But guess what? I go to do a fellowship and I do research, and my research comes back to the fact that Africa's greatest tragedy is the quality of Africa's political class.
All right, so, just hold your thoughts there. Just hold your thoughts there, Doctor. We'll just go on a short break, and when we come, we'll actually just take a few more questions with you then before we let you go. You're still watching the Rise interview, plenty more still ahead, including we'll speak to Emmanuel Kulu, the historian who has been raising awareness of the glorious ancient African history about his new novel, I, Black Pharaoh, Golden Age of Triumph. Stay with us.